Welcome back. We are going to talk about selection and placement, meaning how do we hire employees and put them into jobs within the organization. So we are talking about selection and placement. That's going to cover job descriptions. We're going to talk about recruitment and selection to match company culture. We will be talking about interviewing and testing a little bit, and then an overview of international staffing and placement, meaning global hires, but that's going to be another audio video in terms of the specifics of international. We're also going to talk a little bit about interviewing, what we can and cannot talk about in an interview, and then quickly end with pre-employment assessment tests. So that's what we're doing here for the next few minutes. So, job description. The job description is a written statement that talks about the task, the duties, and the responsibilities that somebody needs to complete, execute, perform in a certain job. And so, how do we actually write a job description? I'm going to quickly go to the next slide to talk about how we write job descriptions or effective, successful job descriptions. So, this slide actually has a few checkboxes, and you can go through this one if you're actually writing a job description for a job within your organization. So some things to think about, right? So you want to make sure, again, task, duties, responsibilities, and we typically go from the order of the things that are the most important that we do in the job to the things that are the least important to be done in the job, in terms of those task, duties, and responsibilities that are essential for successful performance on the job. So things such using bullet points is a useful thing because we can quickly and easily scan the job description to see what type of job candidate are we looking for. We don't want to use things, verbiage or terminology that is specific to the organization. We want to use words, terminology that most people would understand. Where is this located? And if you're doing a national search, which happens a lot where people are relocating, so you're going to get people from New York coming into Sacramento or to San Francisco, what are some local community pages to make sure that they understand the community we are in and that can help them be successful and also stay with the company if they relocate here to come work for us? What is so special about us? We might have some intangibles, some unusual benefits, right? So California, what do we have? We got climate, we got sun, we got beaches, we got Tahoe. These are things that are unusual and intangible to the organization we work for. Maybe you have a culture like Southwest, which is really familial, family-oriented, where they focus on collaboration and friendships that people really want to be part of. Clearly, we need to have information about the organization. We have to have common search terms for keywords so people can find us. We also use industry terms. So if you're in banking, retail, tech, you want to use the terminology that people understand in that industry. And then when you're writing the job description, make sure you have a meaningful job title, right? So if you're working at Sutter, you don't just hire for doctors, you hire for maybe surgeons or pediatricians or anesthesiologists. So use job titles that actually hold meaning. So that's how you actually write a job description. So a job description is just that, an accurate and complete job description that describes task, duties, and responsibilities that tells us what to do in a job. And if we have that, we have a very powerful tool that can help us hire the right person and make sure that they stay with the organization. Because if we make the right hiring decision, chances are that they're not really going to leave us that fast. Here's an example for a barista. Concise, relevant, and avoid jargon, what we talked about on the slide just a second ago. Then we can chat about company culture, right? So these are the intangible things that we have in the organization, the norms, the way we behave, the way we describe how people communicate and act in the organization. So I just gave the example of Southwest, which is a very family-oriented, friendship-oriented culture. Microsoft, on the other hand, is known for being pretty aggressive and assertive and competitive. So the culture just talks about how we actually act around each other in the organization and what's important to us. So of course, when we are hiring people, we want to make sure that people are a good fit both with the job that they are hired to do, but also with the culture. So if we're wanting to keep them for the longer term and they're going to climb that career ladder, making sure we have a good culture fit is super important. So we can do that by asking about life philosophy and what do we like to do, what kind of hobbies. We have to be careful here though, because we want to make sure that most questions are job related because we're hiring to fill a job. And so we don't want to ask questions that can be illegal. So you want to check with your lawyer or your in-house counsel before you start asking questions randomly of your job candidates. So Google has some critical thinking questions, for instance. If you could change the world using Google's resources, what would you build? Okay, so the next couple of things, the last two out of these effective selection and placement strategies. First one is interviewing and testing. All right, let's pick a different color maybe. So interviewing and testing, those are selection methods that we use to make sure that the person is a good fit for the job. So the overall purpose of assessment with job candidates before they're hired into the organization is to get information about them, because we're trying to find people that are good for the job, that can do the job successfully. And so how do you get that information? You get it through talking to them and testing them on certain things, their knowledge, skills, and abilities. Will they actually be able to do the job? That's what we're trying to figure out when we are doing interviewing and testing. So interviews, apart from asking about behavioral situations or their knowledge sets or their skill sets, we can also ask something along the lines of the human being test. So how are you as a person? Will you fit with the job, with the teams we have, with the culture that we have? So trying to get an overall assessment of personality and ability to act and interact with other people around them. When I have managers come in and talk to executive MBA classes, for instance, they sometimes call this the elevator test. So imagine that you are stuck with the person in an elevator for 6 hours, and when you come out of that elevator, would you be able to continue that conversation happily, or are you running away as fast as you can from that elevator because that was just a painful experience? So we just want to make sure that people are a good fit for the other employees that already work there. Okay, as I already mentioned, international staffing and placement, we're going to talk about in another video. So this is just a quick overview, focusing on the fact that when we have global operations, we have offices or retail or manufacturing or any other type of operation outside of the United States. Who do you hire for those jobs? Do you work with expats, meaning we're taking employees from our US operations and we're sending them abroad and we're paying for them to live and work in a different country? Or are you actually picking somebody who's a local, right? So the person who is not currently employed with our organization, but we have an outfit or a branch in Malaysia. So do you hire that local? And the benefit with doing that is, of course, that they have the knowledge about the culture, about the way we do the business over there, but they do not have the inside knowledge of the organization. So we have to make a trade-off or evaluate the pros and cons for hiring or keeping expats versus local hires. And of course, having expats is a very expensive proposition because housing and paying for somebody to live abroad for months or years becomes really expensive. So just a little bit of a deeper dive into one of the tools and methods that we frequently use when we hire people: interviews. So I would venture to guess that most of you have been through some interviews at some point, so you know what they are. So the basic idea behind interviews is to have you talk about, or have the job candidate talk about, their knowledge, skills, and abilities, job experiences, situations they've been in, how they would handle situations coming up, maybe hypothetical situations, because the idea here is that past behaviors will predict future behaviors, and we're also trying to assess knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? So a couple of different types of interviews that we see, or interview questions that we see right now, are the behavioral interviews, where we are trying to assess how people behave and the actions that they take in certain situations. So the situational interview is just that. Describe a situation that you've been in, a situation that might frequently happen on the job here. So describe a problem you've had with someone and how you handle it, for instance. That is a conflict management type questions, and that becomes really important if your company is like Whole Foods, for instance, that work through teams and is very team oriented. Another type of behavioral question is a future-oriented situational interview. So this is a hypothetical. So this hasn't happened yet. I'm not asking you, or we are not asking the job candidate to talk about something from their past, but we are saying, in this situation, that might happen at some point. How would you actually go about solving it or doing it? Hiring people is something that we see a lot of legislation around, meaning that there's a lot of executive orders and laws, federal, state, county laws, that dictate what we can and cannot do when we hire people. So you absolutely want to make sure that you are checking with attorneys or in-house counsel before you start doing interviews and testing on people, because we have a lot of legislation that will protect certain groups or certain characteristics within our workforce. So here's a few of them, and this is just a super brief overview, and we do have other courses in the College of Business that talks about employment and employment law. So firstly, don't talk to people about their age. So age is a protected category, specifically people over 40. We do need to make sure that people are over 18 for most of the jobs, so that you can verify, but that should be a simple yes or no question. Are you over the age of 18? You're not going to ask them, what is your age or how old are you? That would be a very tricky question to ask. So the Age Discrimination in Employment Act is the law that protects individuals who are over the age of 40 from illegal discrimination. Pen, where are you? All right. We also have the Title VII that comes out of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And Title VII actually protects a few different protected categories. For instance, race, color, national origin, sex, as well as religion, which is down here. So race, color, national origin, gender, sex, religion are all covered by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And so we don't want to ask, and we don't want to make hiring decision based on any of those protected categories. Sexual orientation is a more recent, so Civil Rights Act is 1964, and sexual orientation, gender identity, those types of protected groups right now are more recent in terms of legislation, and so do not fall under the prior 1964. We also have disabilities, mental as well as physical disabilities. So mental as well as physical disabilities are protected under ADA, which is Americans with Disabilities Act, and it was amended, so it's now called ADA AA. So here, anybody who has a mental or physical disability, has had a history of having a mental or physical disability, or is perceived to have a health-related issue with mental or physical disabilities, are protected, and there's a big burden on the employer, the company, to make sure that we make our recruitment processes, that we accommodate people with disabilities so that they can partake in those with an equal opportunity as other people. So the basic idea here is that we need to make sure that we are hiring people that can do the job. So any questions that you ask of people should be job related and not related to their person. We don't really care about who they are as a person in that sense, but more we care about can they do the job, because that's what we're hiring them to do. Okay, so when we are doing these pre-employment assessment tests, which is everything we talked about up to this point in this video, is before we're hiring people, we want to get information about them to verify that they can actually do the job and they're going to fit within the organization. So key point here, as I just said at the end of the slide, on the last slide, every question should be job related. Every test should be job related. It's related to the job and not to the person. And we have the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. So Equal Employment Opportunity are the laws that come with that, and the commission is making sure that those things are in place. So the EEOC has guidelines and a lot of writings and things that you can look at if you're in a position where you're hiring people, and so keeping that in mind. So different types of employment tests are obviously, we're trying to find cognitive abilities, we're trying to test for behavioral traits, a lot of different types of testing, but at the end of the day, they have to be legal and they have to be job related. All right, that's it for right now. I'll see you soon. Take care.